What the bosses are going to tell you, what the right-wing media are going to tell you, if they talk about this at all, they're going to say that this is simply card check. This is a backdoor means to get card check.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
In better news, I don't know if we covered this on the show before, but a while back, the NLRB General Counsel expressed an interest in resurrecting the Joy Silk Doctrine. On Monday, she filed a brief in a case called CMEX, requesting that the board use that case to reinstate the doctrine, which is really, really cool. She released a memo saying that, okay, I'm probably going to, this is something that I'm interested in doing, and now she's actually filed a brief in a case to the board, which the board has to decide whether or not they're going to bring this doctrine back. But she's making moves now. And unfortunately, a lot of folks in the audience are saying, what is Joy Silk? What is the Joy Silk Doctrine? But don't worry. That's what we're here for. If you want some more information than what we go into here, I'd recommend reading this article on Brandon Magner's Substack, Why Labor Law Needs Joy Silk Bargaining Orders. A lot of what we're going to be going over today is from that article. To explain Joy Silk, though, let's first circle back to the NLRA and understand one of the protections that it gives working people. Section 8A5 of the NLRA states that it is illegal to, quote, refuse to bargain collectively with the representatives of his employees that has been chosen by a majority of the workers. Further, from Brandon's article, no provision of the NLRA restricts an employer's bargaining obligation only to unions that have been certified through the NLRB's representation election process. Okay? So, the NLRA says employers have to bargain with the bargaining representative of the workers' choosing. So if a majority of workers choose a bargaining representative, they choose to form a union, you have to recognize that. And the NLRA does not say that it can only be unions who are certified through the NLRB election process. Okay? Does that make sense? Therefore, the board, the National Labor Relations Board, which is charged with the enforcement of the National Labor Relations Act, can order employers to bargain with a union that has not yet won an election, but proved their majority through other means, like authorization cards. So what we've got here is an obligation of the company to bargain with a union, but no clear means set out in the NLRA by which to prove that the union represents a majority of the employees. And that is where Joy Silk comes in. In the Joy Silk case, the National Labor Relations Board held that, from the article that Brandon Magner wrote, an employer would violate Section 8A5 and be ordered to bargain if it was presented with a union request for recognition and the employer did not possess a good faith doubt as to the union's majority status when it refused to recognize the union. Okay, so if a union comes forward with authorization cards saying, we have a majority, we request your recognition, and we request that you bargain with us. Joy Silk held that if the employer did not have a good faith reason to doubt the majority, that they would have to bargain. And so they were called Joy Silk bargaining orders when this happened. And so then the question arises, how do you determine if the doubt is good faith? The Joy Silk Doctrine put forward this test. 1, if there was some verbal, written, etc., explicit expression. If there was an explicit expression that they did not doubt the majority status, then they did not have a good faith doubt. Okay, so if you're able to find an email or you have a phone log or a text message or a recorded conversation, and the employer says something to the effect of like, oh yeah, I just like they just admit that yeah, the union probably has a majority, but I just want this time to try to propagandize my workers. Okay, that's not a good faith doubt. You have to recognize and bargain with the union. Okay, the second test is if an employer refuses recognition and then commits unfair labor practices. Because, under the Joy Silk Doctrine, the committing of unfair labor practices over the course of an election is proof that you do not actually have a good faith doubt that they represented a majority, because you are willing to break the law to convince your workers to not join the union. Okay? Does that make sense? So we've got two tests for the good faith, for whether or not they have a good faith doubt. And that's it. You can refuse recognition and then commit ULPs. You don't have a good faith doubt. Or if you explicitly say you don't have a good faith doubt. So what the bosses are going to tell you, what the right-wing media are going to tell you, if they talk about this at all, they're going to say that this is simply card check. This is a backdoor means to get card check. But I just laid out the mechanism by which an employer can push an election if they really feel that the cards are suspect, or if they just like that formality. Don't break the law. Refuse recognition and don't break the law. And you will not be ordered to bargain with a union that has not won an election. That's all you got to do. Don't violate your workers' right to organize, and you will have a secret ballot election, if that's what you want. In effect, what this law did, as opposed to making card check rampant, is that it gave teeth to the board and gave bosses an actual incentive not to break the law. That's what it did. That's the actual effect that it had. It did not institute card check. And we can just look at the data for that. Brandon Magner said on Twitter that in the 20 years that Joy Silk was the official national labor policy governing requests for recognition, NLRB certifications based on card majorities rather than secret ballot elections peaked at a whopping 3.6%. in 1968. That means that is the most ever in 1 year, NLRB certifications of unions that came from card check was in 1968 at 3.6%. That means even after 20 years of this being the official law of the land, at that point, 96.4% of certifications came through a secret ballot election. 96% of elections, of certifications of unions under the Joy Silk Doctrine was in secret ballot elections. Okay, so that is what Joy Silk did. Instead of being a backdoor to card check, it prevented the widespread use of ULPs. We can also see, if we look at the data, we can see an immediate and enormous rise following the elimination of Joy Silk of ULPs. They increased several-fold, like 3 or 4 times more after the elimination of the Joy Silk Doctrine. Employers began firing workers, began discriminating against pro-union workers, began lying to their workers, began threatening workers, all in violation of labor law. That's what actually happened. So doing this, having a Joy Silk Doctrine, that prevented the widespread use of ULPs, and that paved the way for more secret ballot elections, not less. The last year that Joy Silk was used, there were over 8,000 union elections in 1 year, compared to less than 1,000 in 2021. That's the actual record of what Joy Silk did. It paved the way for more elections. It curbed employer violations of the law. And it made the way for more secret ballot elections, not card check. Brian Petruska in the Santa Clara Law Review said this, and he said it really well. Quote, "Those who would suggest that Joy Silk will reduce the number of secret ballot elections have it exactly backwards. It was the abandonment of the Joy Silk Doctrine and the adoption of Gazelle that has massively reduced secret ballot collective bargaining elections in this country. The board's experience with Joy Silk, therefore, shows that Joy Silk had no effect of limiting elections. To the contrary, Joy Silk is necessary to provide a sufficient level of protection to make more numerous elections feasible.
Any word on when we'll find out if the board will accept this?
They're going to evaluate it in the CMEX case that she filed that brief in, requesting that they reinstate the Joy Silk Doctrine. And so, it's probably going to be months before we see any of this instituted, but there are movements, and there is, obviously there's worry about the Supreme Court striking it down, because the Supreme Court already struck down Joy Silk in the 70s, I think. Struck down Joy Silk in the 60s or the 70s. So there's worry that it would say no to this again, but let them do it.
Right. That's not a reason not to try.
Let them do it. Let them make the case that widespread use of unfair labor practices makes for more fair elections.
I think it is important that the General Counsel, the NLRB, is acknowledging that in recent history they have not been able to dissuade companies from breaking the law.
Right.
And I think it's well past time that they acknowledge that. I'm glad to see that. Hoping the board actually follows her lead on this. And, I think we've said it before, but so far she appears to be one of the very few bright spots for labor to come out of the Biden administration.
Right.
Sure. It's been a pleasant surprise to see a much more aggressive NLRB, because after so many years of union busters being put on this board and straight up opponents of unions being in charge, it is nice to see someone with some sense and with a sense of history to try to get NLRB to do their job the way they were designed to do.
Yep.
So we'll see. We'll stay tuned on how this pans out, but very promising. And I think, I think unions across the country need to hear what she's saying and send her some test cases on this and in other areas as well, like the captive audience meetings. Send her the test cases and at least pursue it. And if it gets struck down by reactionary judges, so be it. We get back to the drawing board, but I think it's worth pursuing regardless.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.